So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house, alone watching his dog, that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too, in a bit of a different fashion. I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace, with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents: Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So, if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code and using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you liked staring at trees and crops and having lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore, they sold it 5 years ago, but to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I immediately ran to every window I could to look outside, hoping to see something. I didn't see anything until I got to the window facing the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went straight to the closet to grab the rifle and headed outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" but got no response. When I got to the door, I made it clear I had a gun before looking inside. The storage building was full of stuff, from the sit-down mower to the quad, to endless little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but in that moment, I felt a chill of fear. So, I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and sat by the window, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and couldn't open on its own. Someone had to have opened it. Whether they were still inside the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to call my dad and ask for his opinion. I went to the kitchen, grabbed the landline phone, and called his cell. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd have to leave a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream yet. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, though I put on a TV show in the background to make the wait less monotonous. I had the phone with me, and I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself a tough question: was I just working myself up, or was someone really here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only alert a potential intruder that I'd heard them. At the top of the stairs, I turned on the hallway light. There were 5 doors, all of them closed, 4 led to bedrooms, 1 to the bathroom. Each door had a decent-sized crack underneath that would let me see through. The creak I'd heard earlier had come from my parents' bedroom side of the house. I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of their door, and that's when I saw it, 2 bare feet, facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation hit me hard. I wasn't ready to threaten someone, let alone shoot them. I quickly got up, went back downstairs, and hid in the bathroom to call my dad again. He still didn't pick up, so I left another voicemail. I called again and again, but he never answered. He must have left his phone somewhere. Finally, I did what I should have done right away. I called 911. I whispered into the phone, detailing exactly what was happening. The operator told me to stay put in the bathroom and not make a sound. As I waited, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, approaching the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I'd gone straight there. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and after a brief pause, I heard a deep voice say, "What's up, kid?" I still remember that voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd recognize it instantly. I almost wanted to cry, I was that scared. I ignored the operator's instructions and responded, saying loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now. And I have a gun." I added, putting the operator on speaker as she asked if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. I listened as they faded into silence, followed by the distinct sound of a door slamming, the back door. I breathed a sigh of relief and stayed put, waiting for the police to arrive. When they did, it felt like £1 million had lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, confirming the man was gone, the officers asked if there was somewhere else I could stay that night. I told them I could go to my uncle's house. We called my uncle, who came over, spoke with the police, and then took me to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was all my fault. I'd left the door unlocked when I went to check the storage building. That's when the man must have slipped into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I'd never felt less safe. It was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. Years later, when I was 18, my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by then, so I was responsible for looking after the house. Their property was isolated, surrounded by woods, with a dirt driveway leading to a quiet back road. The road had similar-sized properties along it, spaced apart enough to give it an incredibly remote feel. In that small town, everyone knew each other. You'd see familiar faces at the gas station, the grocery store, and even the bars, as I'd find out a few years later. This story started while my parents were away. I was at a gas station, filling up my tank, when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up at the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee got out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. Small-town life meant it wasn't unusual for strangers to greet each other like that. He set his nozzle to autofill, then walked around to my side of the pump and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I helped him as best as I could, and he pulled out a notepad to write down the directions. I found it strange that he didn't just use his phone like most people would. After thanking me, he asked if I was from the area. I mentioned I'd grown up there, and he replied that he was from out of town, though he didn't specify where. He returned to his car, finished filling his tank, and then asked my name, saying it was nice to meet me. I hesitated, but finally said, "Kate." He responded, "What a lovely name," before getting into his car. As I got into mine, I left the gas station first, turning left to head home. It was only a few minutes' drive before I reached the turn into our driveway. I slowed down, and put my blinker on, then turned right onto the property. It was at that moment that I noticed the car behind me was that same black Jeep Cherokee. He passed me as I turned into our driveway. He went the complete opposite way that I told him to go to get to the interstate. As he passed me, he didn't slow down or anything, so it seemed that maybe he just forgot the directions I gave him and went the wrong way. I let myself inside and went about the rest of my day, doing whatever. I think it was that night that I was going out to meet up with my friends. I stepped outside and walked to my car and heard the sound of footsteps nearby. Like I said, the house is enclosed by woods, and this was in the middle of the summertime. It could have been any number of animals, so I didn't investigate. I just got in my car and left. But when I got back home hours later and walked from my car to the house, a man's voice from out somewhere in the woods called out, "Kate." I got the chills as I looked around and then, in a panic, rushed open the front door. I slammed it shut and sat on the couch to breathe. The neighbors all knew my name, but the houses are not on top of each other, so it's a bit of a walk, and there was no reason for one of them to call my name like that, like a creep, and not identify themselves. I decided to call my parents to tell them, and their explanation was it must have been one of the neighbors and they'll probably knock on the door. I didn't tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next day, which was a Saturday, I stayed home most of the day, and later that night, I once again was going out to meet with my friends. After getting ready and everything, I went outside, and as I was walking to my car, I heard loud and clear from the not-so-far distance someone called, "Kate," again. This time, I didn't wait a second. I ran back inside the house and locked the door. Again, I called 911, this time texting my family while doing so. After 2 cops showed up to the house, they looked around the perimeter of the property with their flashlights, then came back and said to call again if this persisted. I didn't feel much better after this. It's not really like they did much. I refrained from going outside until the next day when I had work. I was a server at a nearby restaurant, and I was working a late shift. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid to hear that voice again. Thankfully, though, I didn't. Maybe seeing the police car finally scared them off. After many hours at work, I was ready to go home and collapse into bed. I pulled onto the property, parked my car out front, and walked to the front door. I stopped when I heard the sound of footsteps again. It didn't sound like an animal's footsteps, though. I stood on the front deck for a second, waiting, and then that familiar voice yelled out again, saying, "Kate, don't call the cops on me again, cutie." I yelled out, "You need help, you're sick," and let myself inside. I called the cops once more, and the cops came again, searched the perimeter again, and left. My parents told me I should stay at a friend's house for the night. I couldn't agree more. They would be back the following night, so after that, I would feel much safer being there. My friend Alex told me I could stay with her that night, so I packed a bag and was ready to go. I checked out the windows first to make sure the coast was clear. I then went outside, locked the door as fast as I could, then ran to the car. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard something right to my left. Right outside the driver's side door was a man wearing a face mask, trying to open the door. I couldn't even scream, I felt like I was choking on air. As I put the car in drive, he started hitting the glass with his elbow. I looped my car around on the grass and sped down the driveway, and I turned right up the road and didn't stop until I got to Alex's house. I was hysterically crying the whole drive there, as I had Alex and her dad on the phone with me. He said he would have come and picked me up had he known my surroundings, and realized he was following me in my car that day. Some people are nuts, and have way too much time on their hands. This incident was a huge motivating factor in my moving out to my own apartment a few months later. I was home alone one night, for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly sometimes spent a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before the lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door, with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever, that included women. I felt so awkward, though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down, because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get this stranger, who was trying to get into my house, to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me, and though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her, maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way, but I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game, and not too long after I sat back down, I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house, and the horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer. At this point, I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "F this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit when the doorbell rang again. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there was someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied, saying, "Yes, she came to my door just before." He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute, and again I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told the woman who he claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I thought she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard. But when I went to the back and looked out the back window, expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear blinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man, and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times, the clinking on the window stopped. By this point, this was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell and stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened when I called him. He told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe, but it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house, too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions led me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door. So, as I mentioned at the start of the video, a week ago, as I'm recording this, something happened to me personally that inspired me to revisit this theme. My friend Cody asked me to watch his dog, Theo, for the night. Theo's a little pomsky, and he barks a lot, so when he started barking like crazy at something going on outside, I didn't pay any attention to it, besides telling him to be quiet a few times. But when he went to the back door and kept barking, I figured he wanted to go outside. As I was going to the back door to open it, I realized someone was trying to open the door from the outside. Then I saw, through the screen of the door, there was another guy looking right back at me. This was in the backyard, which was already alarming enough, and he wasn't someone I recognized to be a family member of Cody's. So, I asked him who he was, and he responded by asking me if I'd seen Melissa, who is Cody's younger sister and in her 20s. Meanwhile, this guy looked like he was in his mid-50s and homeless, so I told him he needed to leave. There was no Melissa who lived here. He said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, you need to leave. There are cameras all over the property." He left right after that. Getting him to leave was easy, but when Cody asked his sister who that guy could have been, she said she had no idea. The guy looked like he was 55, drunk, and filthy, not exactly someone Cody's 20-something-year-old sister would be associating with. The fact that he went to the back door and tried letting himself in was actually pretty terrifying because you could only imagine what he was trying to do to Melissa. It's why so many of these stories could be avoided by just keeping your doors locked.